Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast, When Everything is a Priority, Setting and Supporting Achievable Library Publishing Goals. I'm going to give a few moments for people to join. As people are coming in to the session, I would love it if you would take a moment to just say hello in the attendee chat. Let us know your name and where you're joining from, and we can just say hello to one another that way as people are coming in. I hope everyone is doing well today. My name is Leah Hines. I'm the Executive Director of the Charleston Hub. I'm super happy to be joining all of you here today. We have a great panel lined up. Just a few words of welcome and let's see here. The session is being recorded, and the video recording will be sent to everyone who registered for the event within 48 hours. So you'll have that coming through your inbox pretty quickly. So check for that. We are going to save Q&A and discussion for the end. We'll have at least 15 minutes of Q&A and discussion time. So if you could use that Q&A button to send questions for the presenters, you can do that at any time. Whenever something comes to mind, you don't have to wait till the end to ask your questions. I also have a brief attendee evaluation that'll be sent out after the session is over, and I would love it if you would give us your feedback on how things go today. With that, I am going to say thank you and turn things over to our first presenter, who is Fiona Morley. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Leah, and hi, everybody, and good afternoon from Maynooth in Ireland. I'm just going to open my screen share now. I hope you can see that as a slide share.
Looks good.
Great, thank you. So I'm delighted to be part of this discussion today in my capacity as contact point for libraries supported open access publishing in Maynooth University. I'm giving the perspective today of a relative newcomer to the area of library supported publishing, and I'll be taking you through a couple of our pilot open journal publishing projects. At this point, we do not have a team or indeed a single person dedicated to library publishing. Rather, it has involved a combination of myself and other members of my team working on particular elements of the projects, with nomination of an editorial board and editorial control remaining to preserve of the relevant academic partner in Maynooth. So we have several different models in operation at the moment as part of our pilot. And I think I forgot to introduce myself, so I'll get that out of the way now. So I'm Head of Digital Programs and Information Systems at Maynooth University Library. So you may ask, why do libraries support open publishing and why my library has done so? So it's an opportunity to address local needs, promote research. It's an encouragement of open access publishing models and permissive licensing, allowing for a greater volume of high quality open access scholarship. It gives authors greater control over how their work is published and disseminated. It facilitates the publication of niche and very specialized topics, conference proceedings, grey literature, alternative formats, etc., that may not fit the traditional publishing models. It also forms part of our cost considerations in an era of rising subscription prices that we're all aware of. And the expertise of library staff has proven to be very transferable to local publishing support. In terms of making a case for library publishing, libraries for many years have been managing institutional repositories. And alongside this, we've been engaged in user education and researcher training on various relevant topics such as copyright, use of ORCID and digital object identifiers, fair data, open licensing, and academic writing. It was a natural progression to move into the publishing space, whether that be library-led publishing or publishing support or partnerships with academic departments. I'd just like to touch very briefly on the library publishing landscape in Ireland. The Library Association of Ireland has a library publishing group, and this supports all types of library publishing initiatives across the sector. So part of their activities include awareness raising, events, mentoring, dissemination of information, showcasing of library publishing initiatives. It promotes and teaches the library publishing curriculum, which I've done myself, and it's extremely useful if you're starting out. It liaises with the Library Publishing Coalition, the IFLA Special Interest Group on Library Publishing, and the Irish National Open Research Forum, as well as other relevant stakeholders. And the Library Association of Ireland is a strategic affiliate of the Library Publishing Coalition. And having access to this community of practice has been invaluable for me, and my colleagues on this group are very experienced in the field. They're active in peer-reviewed journal publishing under various models, and a number of them participate on editorial boards. So Maynooth University, under the namespace Maynooth Academic Publishing, became more active in this space in 2018. Maynooth University is strongly committed to open access, and this has driven our endeavours to support open access library-based publishing. We were the first university in Ireland to establish an open access repository way back in 2003, and our open access mandate was very recently revised in 2021, and it's based on national principles for open access. So really, although we accept that researchers have freedom to publish first wherever they feel is most appropriate, regardless of the publisher's policy in open access, but we really strongly encourage the use of open access where possible, and that includes open access journal platforms. I was fortunate to make connections with open access champions across the campus who shared our open access vision. And from this, we developed a number of partnerships, which became our pilot project. And I'll take you briefly through 3 examples now. First, we have the Open Journal of Astrophysics. This pilot project is with the Open Journal of Astrophysics and with Scholastica. So Maynooth University Library had already investigated digital object identifiers and the assignation of a Maynooth academic publishing namespace with a view to expanding our role in facilitating open publishing. Professor Peter Coles of the Department of Theoretical Physics in Maynooth University made contact regarding possible institutional support for his publication, the Open Journal of Astrophysics. The resource limitations, though, were a factor for both the department and for us ourselves in the library. And what was important is that we had an easy to use and a flexible publishing platform with structures to permit a robust peer review process and additional services if required, such as typesetting. And here, following the discussions at Scholastica and the development of the journal space with Maynooth University branding, we managed to launch the Open Journal of Astrophysics on Research Week in 2018, and the university president of the time actually launched it. From our research, we felt that Scholastica was the best platform for this particular need. The Open Journal of Astrophysics is an overlay journal, and the articles sit in Archivex. It was kind of a unique sort of requirement. So we found that need was met by Scholastica on this occasion, and the journal is registered in the Directory of Open Access Journals. Our second example is the Journal of Military History and Defence Studies, and this is a different model, basically. This is an online open access peer-reviewed journal edited by Dr. Ian Speller, the Director of the Centre for Military History and Strategic Studies in the Department of History here in Maynooth. So it was a humanities journal, which is very exciting for us for a start. So basically, the Department of History and ourselves collaborated on hosting this new journal via the Open Journal system. So that's an open journal platform. So this particular one is fully hosted and managed by Maynooth University Library, and it contains original research contributions in military history and defence studies. So for this journal, we provided the DOIs through Crossref, and we assisted with obtaining an ISSN for the journal. The articles are released under the open license CC BY 4, and it was launched on the 12th of February 2020 during our annual Love Data Week event. So just our third example is Dance Cult, and this is yet again another model of how we assist with managing an open journal. So this particular journal had a long history. It was established in 2009, and the support for it was taken over by Maynooth University Library in late 2020, following discussions with Dr. Alistair Fraser of the Department of Geography and board member of Dance Cult. So this is a peer-reviewed open access e-journal for the study of electronic dance music culture, and is published once a year. So Maynooth agreed to take over the web hosting cost. It's an open journal system, externally hosted and managed, and we used our existing Crossref account to supply DOIs. We put the Maynooth logo on the website, and a memorandum of understanding was signed, and that's quite important when it's I suppose when you're taking over something from somewhere else. So as you can see, our library supports academic-led publishing in various ways. This collaboration by Maynooth University Library and academic departments in the production and support of these journals has been a hugely positive experience. And we hope to foster further collaborations going forward and would encourage other libraries to consider the same. So in terms of challenges, one major challenge in this space, well, we feel here in Ireland anyway, is the lack of wider awareness of library publishing, perhaps compared to the awareness you may have in the United States or in the UK or Canada or elsewhere. But this is changing rapidly with the Library Publishing Group and with the launch of institutional journals from multiple institutions such as TU Dublin, Dublin Business School, Trinity College and others. And a further challenge, which we all know about, is capacity building. So in library publishing platforms, but also the long-term sustainability of this work. And we have a wealth of information and shared expertise to draw on, but as is the case with many initiatives, resources are an issue. For now, we have to cut our cloth according to our measure. And for me, that means prioritizing those journal projects that align with our institution's open access goals. So what does the future hold? The Library Publishing Group of the Library Association plans to work towards a set of national principles as a group project, mapping these where possible to those of the National Irish Open Research Forum, Plan S, those of the Library Publishing Coalition and IFLA standards. And down the line, we aspire to a national platform subject to collective agreement. In the shorter term, we're using our collective knowledge to share and build expertise and to promote and support library publishing and library supported publishing across our own institutions and generally. In more practical at a local level, obviously, I would hope to further collaboration with academic and university staff interested in open access publishing locally and expand our open publishing activities, hopefully get more open access journals on Scholastica or on other platforms, and basically build a community of knowledge and expertise around the campus around open access publishing, an education and an outreach activity. And maybe someday we may aspire to have Maynooth Academic Publishing as a university press, but we'll just have to see. So really in conclusion, open access can be unfairly associated with a perception of lower quality, but librarians are familiar with the specific requirements for indexing in the directory of open access journals, preservation, publishing standards, and so forth. We believe librarians are integral to the transition of an open access culture with a focus on quality and discoverability. The Library Publishing Coalition publishes resources on workflows, standards, ethics, and sustainability, which we have drawn on for our work in this area also. We want library-led and library-supported publishers to be full and equal partners in the open access publishing community and to promote this activity as another route to open access scholarly dissemination. And I'll finish on this thought. Graham Stone of JISC, commenting on the next generation library publishing at the recent IFLA World Conference, posed the question that if universities are not publishing in 5 years, they need to articulate, right, why not? And I look forward to our discussions later. Thanks very much.
Great. I think I am up next. Thank you very much, Fiona. That was wonderful. I especially appreciated that you had some examples of the current journals that you're working on, because I'm going to be talking specifically about one journal that my library publishing program works on. So hello, everyone. My name is Emma Moles. I'm the publishing librarian at the University of Minnesota. As I just said, my brief talk today is going to be focused on thinking about individual journals, and I'll explain a little bit of why I'm headed in that direction. So a little background on the University of Minnesota Libraries Publishing real quickly. I think it's nice that Fiona gave an overview of what she's working on, because it shows sort of the diversity of library publishing approaches. So at the University of Minnesota, we have been a library publisher for, I think, maybe 7 years. Time is not something I'm good at judging right now, but we publish a number of things, including open access monographs, open textbooks, journals, and then some projects that kind of fall into the gray areas of those categories. But today I'm going to be talking specifically about our journal program. We publish around 24 journals across many disciplines. So Fiona had a nice selection of journals as well that really illustrates how library publishers tend not to be too discipline specific. So across disciplines, we tend to focus a little bit more on social sciences, but that's just kind of been our nature of relationships that we have across campus. The journals offer a variety of peer review, so we don't set any specific peer review standards or expectations. All of our journals are reviewed. How the individuals handle that, again, depends on the journal and sometimes the discipline or subject area. They're all open access with either a CC BY license or a CC BY NC non-commercial license. These decisions have been mostly made by journal editors themselves, again, for a variety of reasons, including disciplinary standards. Our publishing program has 4 staff members, two of whom are full-time. I am one of those full-time people. So the other 2 members of the publishing team also have responsibilities elsewhere in the library, and they end up spending about half of their time. There's a lot of ebbs and flows in our workload, so they probably on the average spend about half of their time on publishing. Our journals are either on Open Journal Systems, OJS, and or WordPress. Again, some of that are because journals come to us already on platforms, other sort of have their disciplinary preference. Our OJS journals are hosted by PKP, so we as a publishing unit don't actually manage the updates or technical infrastructure behind OJS. We're more of the customer service front facing. It's who our editors communicate. We're sort of the middle person in technical needs from PKP. We also have a dedicated funding for our program that comes out of the library collection budget. I think this is important to note because it's not true of all library publishing programs, but it's true at the University of Minnesota. So we do have some funds to support things that individual journals need. That could be layout, it could be design for covers, etc. One of the things that we do, and again, I really want to focus specifically on our individual journals in our publishing program, is that we think a lot about the goals of our individual journals. I was speaking recently with a colleague from Ohio State, and we were talking about sort of goals for our publishing program as a whole. And she made a comment, that really I imagine our program is successful if our individual journals are happy and things are getting done as they need to get done. So I think that really highlights this focus that we as a publisher have on the success of our individual journals. And we really view the journal's success as our success. So those two things are super tied together. When we bring on a journal for our publishing program, whether that's a journal that comes from another publisher or a brand new journal that's just starting, we set up prior to publication a number of meetings that happen before launch. And one of those or multiple of those meetings are focused a lot on developing individual goals for the journals themselves. We separate them into year 1, year 3, and year 5 goals. And again, those years are corresponding with how long that journal has been with us as a publisher. So a year 1 goal for a journal that already existed could be really the journal's 11th year, but it's their first year with us. These journal goals are framed also as measures of success. So it's one of the ways that we are then able to tell if our journals are meeting their own definition of success. Again, we as a publisher don't have, we don't exert a lot of control over our journals as far as what their goals are. We view ourselves very much in a guiding role to help visualize and actualize some of those goals, but we don't create the goals for the journals themselves. We also view this framing as measures of success, a way to bridge that gap that often exists between goals and then the metric at which you are measuring if you have met that goal. So one of the things that we do with our journal is actually ask, if your goal is X, how are you going to know if you've accomplished that goal? So that conversation really helps a lot of our journals. The goals are also developed in connection with what we call on the form that we use internally business objectives, and that's really aligned with the journal's overall mission statement or alignment. So that's typically something that journals also have on their about page, their aims and scope, for example. And I did want to mention that I actually wrote a brief article that talks about some of this and includes the section of the worksheet that we use internally in Against the Grain, and I've linked it here on this page. So briefly, as some examples for what this looks like for a journal, we have a pharmacy journal that was previously self-published. So the department within the University of Minnesota School of Pharmacy was self-publishing this journal. They came to us looking for a more formalized publisher because they needed things like DOIs, preservation method, et cetera. So the journal had already existed for a number of years. And when we were setting up their journal and walking through with the editors, this sort of goal development, they identified what I would say are fairly common types of goals across years 1, 3, and 5. So year 1, they really wanted to focus on increasing submissions. Because we were putting them on a more formal journal system, they would be able to handle a lot more submissions. So that's why that goal existed in year 1. In year 3, they wanted to recruit and onboard new editorial board members. So again, this was something that previously the editorial board was really colleagues from within one department. They wanted to open that up as submissions were increasing to have a lot more institutional variety among their board members. And their goal for year 5 would actually probably what they wanted to put for goal 1, but I talked them into pushing this out because the process tends to be a little bit long, is to be indexed in PubMed Central. So that was their year 5 goal. Of course, with all of these, we talked about how would they know if they succeeded. They had some benchmarks for increasing their submissions, et cetera. So I think thinking about that year 5 of getting indexed into PubMed Central, this was really one where I knew those of us who are the staff members in library publishing really need to focus on and needed to be of the most assistance. The first couple of goals in year 1 and 3 really relied heavily on the editorial board members kind of coming up with how they were going to do that. But year 5, it needed a lot of hands-on work from us, including figuring out how to walk through the submission process, getting their articles into XML, all of that work that goes into preparing a journal for PubMed Central. Once they reached that goal, which I think was during year 5, might have been 5.5 or 6, but once they reached that goal, then it really was up to us to come back to that conversation of what's next for the journal. What's the year 10 goal? What happens after you accomplish the thing that you wanted to do? I think a goal like getting indexed in PubMed Central is a common goal. A lot of our journals have index goals, but it's also complicated because in some ways being in PubMed Central places the journal in a role that it must meet a few more standardizations. There's not quite as much flexibility to then pick a year 10 goal that really could kind of derail what the journal needs to meet for PubMed Central requirements. So what happens after this? How does achieving this goal impact the future goals? Like I said, what might the journal give up by meeting one of these goals? So for example, in PubMed Central, we have to have the articles kind of meet some of those PubMed Central standards. So, really taking the journal in a completely different direction, maybe featuring works of folks in other disciplines kind of throws some of that into question. So it really makes us rethink what kind of future are we looking at now that we've accomplished some of those things in the past. In year 10, this journal is looking to increase the global representation of authors. And I think it is important because one of the things about this journal, and I would say that this is true of all journals, is we are living in a time where things come up for the journals that might make them pivot or change directions. So, you know, on a final note, I want to say that as a library publisher, I think it's our place to make sure that our journals are successful using their own definitions of success. Are they meeting their goals? Journals do not exist in a vacuum. So we have seen increased efforts to diversity, equity, and inclusion and access across not only our campus, but across academic publishing. These conversations are propelling at a pretty fast rate, and that's going to impact this journal. They're going to need to respond to things like equity statements and thinking about that global representation. So what happens when the goals shift and some things need to pause and some things need to start up faster than maybe they were anticipating? I really see my role as one of helping journals shape their achievable goals, and that those goals are rooted in sustainability. And by that, I mean things that will also help the journal continue. I think for those of us who work in serials, we know that that's one of the fates that's out there of that some journals go belly up for a lot of reasons. So thank you. I know that was brief. I'm always happy to take questions, and feel free to email me as well. So thank you very much, and I look forward to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was, I'm sitting here like frantically scribbling notes here, because I don't think, you know, I've ever done goal setting along those lines before with my journals. And so today I'm going to talk some about working specifically with student partners. So let me share my screen here. And there we are. All right, hopefully that is functioning. All right, so my name's Franny Gady. I am the Director of Digital Scholarship Services at the University of Oregon. And before that, I was the first scholarly communication librarian at Butler University in Indianapolis. And I mention this because I'm going to talk about some of the work that I did there as well, and kind of compare and contrast some of the projects that I did at both universities. So kind of both a liberal arts school and an R1 here. So the idea here is one-stop shop, meaning I'm the one person at both universities who is really working with undergraduate research here, and also graduate research once I got to University of Oregon. At both schools, I worked with student assistants in addition to the student editors for these journals, but really it was kind of me that people were stopping with. So let's see, so right sizing and managing library-led open access publishing with student partners. So I'm going to go through a number of different models that each of these different journals would use, and kind of talk about some of the different levels of service and support that these models required. And initially I was kind of thinking, how do I want to title this talk? And one of the titles that I went through was talking about t-shirt sizes. One of my former supervisors liked to talk about that when we discuss projects and project management. Is this a small, a medium, or large? And I'm sitting here thinking, you know, when I'm looking at sizes, sometimes, you know, they're all just made up anyway, right? And oftentimes, you know, when you're talking about and thinking about a project, it'll end up just kind of getting larger and larger over time. So anyway, ended up with the one-stop shop, because oftentimes it is just a single person who ends up working with these projects. And you know, with successful publishing programs, once folks see one successful journal, others will come to join the party. So hi, this is me. I'm at MF Gady at Twitter, and MFGady at UOregon is my email address. I'll be happy to share all of my contact information in the chat and my slides as well. So this was my very first undergraduate research journal, my first project here. So this is BJUR, the Butler Journal of Undergraduate Research. So this is kind of interesting in that two faculty members came to me with this idea. It was funded by a kind of from the on high, provost and president had this innovation grant fund where they would give some money to get a project off the ground. And so these two faculty members came to me and they're like, we have this idea for an undergraduate research journal. And I've since come to realize that this isn't the typical model for an undergraduate research journal. It features student work, but undergraduates are kind of otherwise uninvolved. It's connected to an undergraduate research symposium that the university hosts, where students from all over the area, neighboring states, I realize in the Midwest, a couple hour drive is sort of not an issue. So folks will come from all over for the symposium. And that's kind of the primary, hey, you should publish your research in this journal. And it often does. So it's not just Butler, it's a variety of institutions and undergraduates who publish here. And one of the key features that the faculty members were really interested in was that the quality of the research was super high, and that the review process was very rigorous. And so a big chunk of the funding for this, that innovation seed grant funding and then ongoing funding for the journal, would go to pay faculty reviewers to review the research and make sure that it was of a high quality. So that was something that they were very keen on for this process. And then the library's role in this journal was actually a really kind of high touch, as you might say. So helping with editing, layout, design, and then kind of the full suite of support. So Butler is on Digital Commons platform and uses the Etiquette kind of backend for that full kind of support process there. And they have kind of a series of forms that they use to kind of help set the, what do you want the process of working with this journal to look like? So this was the very first student journal that I worked with here. And then very quickly led to the second journal, which for me, I think was it really kind of shaped the way that I thought that student journals could work, should work, might look like going forward. I think there were a number of features of this that I kind of brought forward in my thinking. So this had a faculty advisor, and the journal survived the turnover of the faculty advisor. And so I think that's a really key feature for journals that do have faculty advisors that aren't particularly embedded in the library, which some journals are more or less. So finding a successor just in case the inaugural faculty advisor does happen to leave. But the journal did have a student editorial board that was kind of elected more or less from among all of the students who participate in the work of making this journal possible. And then the journal is a pharmacy journal, which is kind of a professional program at the university. And it is a course for credit. So the students get credit for participating here and creating this journal, with the idea that it is created by and for practicing professional students who are in kind of varying stages of this professional program. And then this was the part that I really loved about this journal and really encouraged them to explore. And then this was also the part that I think the library and I was most deeply embedded in, was that it wasn't just the scholarly article, but it also included an infographic and a video with the author of the article. And so with the idea that, hey, pharmacists are busy professionals, they don't necessarily have time to sit down and read the full article, that there's kind of the at a glance infographic and a short video explaining what's going on in the article. And hey, do I need to read the whole thing to understand what's going on in here? And for me, kind of my transition from working full-time in scholarly communication to a sort of broader remit in digital scholarship was not just open access, but interest in kind of expanding understanding of scholarly work. So I just love this idea and am very enthusiastic about students working on kind of broadening audience to scholarly information. So the library, in addition to kind of providing support platform for publishing, this also did quite a bit of copyright education in and around, like, this is how you'll provide, create these infographics graphics. So kind of talking about how do you identify images that you can use in these. So that was a big part of supporting the BU Well. And so having a really strong faculty advisor for this journal was important because they taught the course for credit. And then also they supervised the turnover of the student editorial board for year to year. But there was also a very strong student component because they were the ones who do the review, the writing, the editing, the layout. It's very much in student hands here. So Manuscripts was a very different sort of student journal. And I included this because I wanted to say that it's not just student research journals. And this is a student literary magazine that is published through, they also do a print version, but it's published through Butler's institutional repository. And this started as an archival and digitization project. The very first volume dates back to 1933. And there was a great deal of student support for scanning and creating the metadata and splitting everything up into the repository. And, kind of on an annual basis for each of the volumes, there's very little library involvement, definitely not going in to talk copyright for images for them. So it's, kind of a very light touch, not a whole lot of kind of time and energy required to make this available here. But I really love the example of having the creative writing and poetry available in the institutional repository and this open access publishing idea. I know creative writing in English oftentimes are more difficult to have that open access conversation with. So after I left Butler, one of the first things I did, having had this amazing experience working with all of these student researchers and writers, was to seek out, what's going on here with undergraduate research. And there's a long established undergraduate research journal with an amazing history, having been embedded in the library, with a paid editor-in-chief position, supervised by a librarian with a faculty advisor to help oversee turnover. I think this is a real consideration because I've heard at least horror stories of many journals just not surviving that turnover there. This is a pretty kind of high impact for the librarian because they do supervise the editor-in-chief who kind of oversees all of the journal, but the editorial team does the review, does all of the editing, including copy editing and layout. But, in terms of like, how much work is this? How much impact does this have on the librarian's time? In terms of the time and money paradigm, these are things that could all potentially be outsourced. And, for us, I think sometimes there are more like one-time money that we might be able to invest to help get something off the ground too. And undergraduate research is one of those high impact practices that the university does like to invest in. So the undergraduate research journal here has been going on for a long time, has switched over from open journal systems to WordPress to give the students some more kind of control over their own destiny, to give them a little bit better handle on what they're working on here. So Punta is one of the most exciting projects that I've worked on since I got to Oregon. Shortly after I arrived, we had a grant period where we opened the doors and said, hey, anybody who has a digital project that would like support from the Digital Scholarship Services Department, come on down. And one of the applicants that we got was a group of graduate students who said, hey, we're paying a bunch of money to openjournalsystems.com for hosting. This isn't sustainable. Can you help us? So we have a long-term shared OJS installation with Oregon State University as part of our Oregon Digital project. So we didn't end up giving them one of our grants, but we said, this is so within our remit, we absolutely want to help you, and brought them on board to kind of integrate them into that existing project. And they're basically one of the faculty level journals. They are highly professionalized. Anything that we might do for one of the kind of faculty journals that we've brought on board, we do for this graduate journal. They are amazing. I love working with them. They're very motivated. They have a double-blind peer review process that they take incredibly seriously. Their layout is stunning, and they have amazing questions. So all of the things that Emma was talking about in terms of goal setting, they set their own goals there, and are very interested in kind of growing and being part of that scholarly conversation, and really kind of setting the stage for this area of critical phenomenology, and having special issues. And for graduate students who are kind of the new generation of scholars there, really exciting and motivated there. And I think probably the big movers and shakers in our journal program. And oftentimes when I talk about, undergraduate student research and graduate student research, our electronic theses and dissertations and undergraduate theses, that's the stuff that gets accessed the most, because it's the new and exciting things that haven't necessarily hit kind of the scholarly monographs and all of that. So this is a really exciting journal, and some graduate students who are doing some really interesting work here. And then there's the undergraduates who saw what Punta were doing when they're like, we want in on that. So they found a faculty advisor who's like, yeah, we'll help you out. We'll kick you over some money to get going. And so there are undergraduate students who have a WordPress site. Punta is on Open Journal Systems, but the undergrads were like, nah, we don't need all of that. And they've asked a handful of questions. We archive all of their materials in Scholars Bank, our institutional repository, and help mint DOIs for them. But other than that, they're completely on their own. Ask a handful of questions, but they are full steam ahead. So I thought they were super impressive, and wanted to talk a little bit about, this is not a big draw on my or anyone at the library's time, but just asking a handful of questions inspired by the success of the graduate students in Punta. So those were kind of some of the different models of undergraduate and graduate student research that I've seen, both at Butler and Oregon, and would love to talk some more about both student and faculty journals here. But I think it's a real growth area and something that's really exciting going on at a variety of different institutions, and not so much if you build it, they will come, but once it's built, people see the success and it really builds on itself. So thanks so much. I'm going to hand it over to Brian now.
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen. Here we go. All right, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect, great. So I'm gonna draw from some of these themes I think that were discussed from Fiona, Emma, and Franny, and talk about, I guess, some lessons learned, or for people maybe if they're starting their journals program, maybe setting some expectations for what this might look across the journal life cycle. And I sort of broke it into 3 phases, what I'm calling the startup phase, level up phase, and the now what phase. For me, sort of the background I'm bringing is we have a software platform, Scholastica, and we're used by many small, medium publishers. We're used by a couple dozen library published journals. And so we've worked with them. We're actually turning 10 this year. So we've worked with some of these library published journals for sort of 5 to 10 years and seen changes over time. So I'll share some of that. Again, this is more about Scholastica if you're not super familiar. But I'll start with the startup phase. I think we have some interesting examples of this, but I think of this as that sort of, sometimes we talk about the first year or two, and I like to think of a year 0, which is often, there are a couple examples shared where there's sort of the idea and there's getting it up and running, which, I mean, there's just sort of so much in that. And people talked about this, it's getting the people, which usually is like sort of the editors, editorial board, but it's often support staff. So at the library, technical, sort of figuring out who's needed to make this happen. And there's stuff, right, people don't have, ISSNs, websites. What's exciting during this period is that there's a lot of goals that can be set, and they're sort of can be quickly realized. So really important stuff like ISSN, you can sort of set that goal and get it. And it's not that it's itself, it's important, but there are goals later on that can take more time. And some of the things like writing your author guidelines, that takes time, but it's sort of shippable because it's a project an individual editor or the support staff can sort of help with and get done. And I'll talk about this, but that's very exciting. There's sort of a lot of traction here. One of the common challenges I want to mention during this period is that sometimes the first issue can be a challenge depending on the journal. Sometimes it's the first one is great, and the second one, they had some great interest or they had a planned special issue, but then the next submission period's a challenge. And just something we've heard from editors pretty, sort of commonly across the board is, at least for the first issue, if not continuing for the first, say, 3, plan on some or all of those articles being solicited. So especially the first issue, it's a very common model for the editors to either, to reach out to their network and say, we want the first 2 issues to be really exciting. So we want to ask you, someone who's maybe mid-level in their career and has lots of options of where they could be submitting, to submit one for us. That way people know about our journal, not just from our PR, but there's already some good content. It builds trust. And so that idea of inviting or soliciting content for those first couple journals I want to mention. But really where I want to highlight as we get into this is I think some of those infrastructure goals for getting it up and running, getting the first issue out. Again, it's very exciting. And I think it's not that the others aren't, but it's just, I think it's faster as well. The next one, and I call this level up phase, years 3 to 6. And there are a lot of examples mentioned today from this. So indexes, I know Emma mentioned, working with journals who are looking at PMC. Often this is where this comes up, is they're sort of up and running, and now they're saying, okay, we sort of have proved the journals around. I'll also note that year 3 is often important because it's like, oh, this wasn't a project that fizzled out, because that does happen. There are lots of journals that have 1, 2, or 3 issues and it sort of goes away. Hitting that sort of year 3 and it's still going, I think that's really important for sort of indicating longevity. But that idea of indexes or discovering, there's, even for the editor, sometimes it's, well, we're publishing stuff, we want to see people reading it, we want to see indications that this is having the impact on our field or that our subfield, or sometimes new journals even are indicating or creating these new subfields. One of the challenges that come with that, and again, Emma mentioned this, is indexes often require richer metadata, also standards. And I'll jump into that last bullet here. An example we've seen is sometimes people launch journals and they're very inspired about wanting to sort of on every aspect of publishing. They want to do lots of things differently. And an example you might see is people might say, we want to have these really different kinds of collections or different ways of thinking about what an article is or article type. And then later when they go to get in indexes, there might be requirements. Like PMC has a standardized set of article types, and you can always choose other, but often that creates work because people say, and I call this early decision debt, is we did a lot of things and we've sort of built up content, and now we realize we want to do it differently. And in year 0, well, you could just change it. In year 3, 4, or 5, you have to go back and change it for all the stuff you've already done. So it's just, it's a little heavier. That's kind of what I meant by it's not quite as fast as the startup phase that you have. When you make a change, it cascades into many other things. This is also a moment where people are often talking about sustainability, funding wise, or people. And I'll come back to that in a moment. This is also one where people, early on that startup phase, often the journals will sort of do everything themselves. Layout, they'll make their first issue, they'll make a nice looking PDF. They've set up hosting themselves. This is often one where people are starting to say, and we had some of the examples, Franny shared one where it's, I'd love if we could host this somewhere that wasn't as expensive. So people tend to look, they start looking for their partners at the library system, or there are pieces they start saying, well, what can we outsource? Can we outsource hosting? Can we outsource the layout or converting to XML? That these are things we've been sort of doing, but also ideally the journal has grown and there's just more content. And I also know this is often where people realize we're doing a lot more than we were 3, 4, 5 years ago, but we have the same team. We have a bunch of volunteers is very commonly the model. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge to do more. And I'll sort of lead into that next piece. I think a lot about people in those sort of the now what phase. And Emma had a great example of this. I think it was someone in their 10-year moment where it's sort of saying, okay, you've hit some of these early goals, but now what? I mean, do you feel like you've made it? That's usually not the problem. It's people sometimes say, oh, we've been talking about something for 8 years. It still seems hard. And so I think about a lot of this is about the founding editors or the early editors, that sort of fatigue. Sometimes you also have people say, I've been doing this for 10 years. I really want to get out. And then they find that maybe one of the sustainability goals they didn't have was building up a pipeline of editors is now a major challenge because, there were 2 editors, both sort of want to move on to something else. And that, that's a critical moment for the journal that can definitely lead to, I think Emma said, the journal going belly up. And so, this sort of maintaining, there's also this question, sometimes journals say, what we want to do is maintain what we're doing. We want to make this easier versus setting new goals, because often there's this idea of, well, every new goal we've set, it added more work. And so some goals are, one and done. So again, back to the idea of writing your author guidelines or something like that, applying to an index might be one and done, but maintaining the metadata, continuing to review content, sometimes those can, again, add up where now you feel like there's just more work. And also the space is changing, that sometimes as journals mature and they work with the library who's aware of where sort of quality is being looked at these days. And I've used this slide elsewhere, but as people get into this, sometimes in that area, 6 to 12 years, they start saying, oh, but shouldn't we have our more of our policies? Shouldn't we be looking at publishing data? Is our XML actually correct? And you start getting into, sometimes it's daunting to say, they become aware of these things and then achieving it is really difficult. So that's a challenge. In listening to the presenters speak, some things that came up I wanted to mention, people, we had examples from Fiona, where they have no sort of full-time dedicated staff. Franny, the sort of one-stop shop, the one person. Emma, where they have 4 people, 2 of which were full-time. That's a challenge. That especially as the journals grow and for library publishing program, adding more journals, that can be really difficult. Sort of people can only do so much. I think we've all experienced that. There's also the idea of goal setting. And again, some great examples across this. Often it's survival, or it's, more discrete, the way Emma talked about that. One thing I often recommend to people when thinking about goals is sometimes I've worked with journal editors where sometimes the goals are incredibly large, which is not that it's bad, but often I encourage people to look at a quarter or 6 months or a year and sort of say, okay, but what are we actually going to achieve towards that? Because if it's, we want to, or the goals are long-term, we want to get in this index. Well, you can't even apply till you're 2 years old. So what can we do along the way? Or what else can we do? There's this idea of agile. I won't go too far into this, but the takeaway I always like is encouraging and helping editors talk about what's a single problem, and let's sort of work on that. And it might be that there's lots of important things. We can make a list of 50, but let's pick one that we can actually solve over the next 3, 6, 9 months and get the benefit now, versus having a really big project that in 5 years we're going to be amazing, but you might not feel like you're getting better along the way. And so solving problems, trying to help people set concrete goals is something I really encourage. So again, identify a problem, solve it, get the benefit, do it again. Another theme was change. I think everyone talked about as the journals changed over time, as new journals came in, people had to be flexible. The idea of different hosting solutions, the idea of different infrastructure, different relationships. I also liked the idea that there's a lot of the projects were very different, and trying to be, I think, as a library publishing program, I think a theme was people saying supporting what the journals want to do. But that also can change when editors change. That can change how the journals are setting their goals. One of the last themes, I think it's sustainability. I don't want to go too far and put, sort of words in your mouth, Fiona, but I also felt like there was a sense of, you want to do more, but you can, people can only do so much more without also changes in things like staffing. I think there's also this idea of financial sustainability. As journals professionalize, sometimes it becomes, if you want to hit that goal, you need to work with more partners or more vendors, and then that can bring in a financial question. And as I mentioned before, also who the editors are and what their energy is. So those are some of the themes that we've seen with journals, but also I tried to connect to today. So that's me. I'm with Scholastica. These are my handles on Twitter.
I believe I've frozen here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for all of our presenters. I think I'm having a bit of bandwidth problem here, so I apologize. But we are going to move into the discussion and Q&A portion of our webinar today. So we have a few questions that have already come in. If you have more questions for our presenters, you can send those in through the Q&A button or the attendee chat. So to start off with, we have a question for Emma from Timothy. How do you help journals editors to set realistic expectations of what they can accomplish? And how would you assess your journal's goals in comparison to what might be expected for commercial journals?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I think a lot of it is a lot of conversations up front. So one of the things I try to do is have those conversations about goals, about strategy to meet those goals prior to launching the journal. It's harder with pre-existing journals. So journals that are switching publishers and coming to us the first time. Often because they maybe were already on like a path towards a goal. Sometimes that path didn't make sense or that goal didn't make sense. I have to also just have a lot of very blunt conversations with journals. And sometimes journals are doing things in a way that's limiting what their goal is going to be. So if, for example, if a journal has not articulated in their licensing terms or their author agreements that the journal wants to also apply to a commercial index, if they have some kind of wording in their author agreement that doesn't allow for that, we have to go back and address that. And then what does that mean for back files? Do we need to seek permissions on those things? So, and the other thing to note is like, I'm working mostly with journals that have faculty editors who haven't worked with another publisher before. So that is, or sometimes they have, but a lot of times it's self-published. So that's hard too, because people just don't know the amount of labor that goes into things. And I would say, Timothy, that goes into your second question of like balancing that labor. Brian did a nice job of talking about that, of setting real expectations of like, okay, if you want to get into PubMed Central, here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to clean up all of those metadata, that fields that you've custom added, because that doesn't make sense right now. And we're going to have to fix all of those. So a lot of it is being very transparent and having those conversations early.
Great, thank you very much. I have a question here for Fiona. What are the pros and cons for different journal setups or lessons learned for the different ways you outlined Maynooth is supporting their journals?
Okay, well, the pros and cons, I suppose from our point of view, obviously it's a great advantage to have our journal hosted externally because of our limitations in resource. So that is a big plus for us. Having said that, it is interesting to manage our own local journal, but that's fine, I guess, when we're just testing and piloting with one. If we had 50 of those, that would be a whole different scenario. So where your resources are so strictly limited and you're having to draw on, I guess, resources from plucking from other elements, parts of the library or other people who are busy with other things. Definitely the externally hosted option was definitely a plus for us. Could you remind me, please, of the second part of the question?
How would you assess your journal's goals? Oh, sorry, that's the wrong. Yeah, how would you assess your journal's goals in comparison to what might be expected for commercial journals?
Yes, I suppose we have got into this pilot with the view that it's not a commercial enterprise. So I guess our approach is a little bit different. Our goal really is to, I suppose, have an alternative option in the open access landscape for researchers to publish. So at this point, I guess we're working on creating that infrastructure to enable that to happen. It's not a commercial venture. We're certainly not going to profit off it. But again, I guess because we're very much in a pilot phase, that's fine for now. But I guess over time, or if we move into the space of setting up a university press, then we might have to look obviously at a different model for this. So I suppose for now, we're focusing on something that we can fund through our own library budget, but in the future, obviously that may have to change. We wouldn't compare ourselves, I guess, to a commercial enterprise, except in terms of quality.
Thank you. I have a couple here. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, from Sigrid. There's a trade-off between creators' rights and open licensing, which involves a surrender of some of the creators' rights. Anyone else run into this trade-off? For example, with a literary journal, authors would want to retain licensing rights. So that question came in during Franny's presentation, but I think it could be open for anyone's experience.
Yeah, excuse me. And I think, we have exclusively used non-exclusive licenses, particularly in and around the creative writing work. So like manuscripts, and there's another creative writing journal at Butler called Booth. And both of those are published through the institutional repository. And so, yes, there are some surrender of creator rights, but looking to keep as many as possible with the creators, so it's not keeping them from publishing elsewhere. Depending on what they're looking at doing afterwards. I was always really impressed with the people who were, with the programs there and their attitude toward open access and creative writing. I haven't encountered it elsewhere, I have to say, but I think with the non-exclusive licenses, that's generally the way to go, and how I've encouraged the other journals that I've been working with those are the kinds of licenses that I've encouraged them to use. It's been interesting working with student journals in particular, that we do see a lot more humanities and social sciences publishing in the undergraduate research journals, and fewer in the natural sciences, because oftentimes they're collaborating with faculty who would like to publish their research elsewhere and consider publication in undergraduate research journals prior publication. And so that's something that we've been working to address, because I do think it's valuable for students to also be able to publish on their own, to be first author on their own papers. So I do think it's interesting, and yes, it's a problem too in terms of open access publishing, and so it's something we're addressing, and definitely a disciplinary difference.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of time here. We've come to the top of the hour. Brian, I had a quick question for you, and then we'll close out. Of the journals that you work with, you mentioned over 1,000 journals that you've worked with. What % of those journals make it out of that startup phase, the 1 to 3 year phase? And do those that make it past that phase have anything in common, any common themes that you've noticed?
Sure. I don't know the % off the top of my head. I mean, I think it's good, but I wouldn't be surprised. It's by the way, something we should look at, because we work, those journals who we think them as they're new to the world versus new to us, right? So what does that look like? So I don't know that number. I do know that multiple editors. So I think the single editor passion model is great for getting it started. And I think that's also, though, puts a lot of weight on one person, and often is where I'll say, I'm thinking of lots of examples, even if they get past the 3 year mark, the 5, 6, 7 year mark becomes really challenging. And so I think multiple editors who are passionate, I think, is a very strong indicator, and I'd have to look for commonality. I don't have a better answer, but I kind of feel like that could be a little mini research project of mine. Maybe I can present that at some future one.
That sounds great. Thank you. Well, thank you again to all of our presenters. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you to everyone who attended. Just as a reminder, this video recording is going to be sent out within the next couple of days, and we'll also send the slides as well so that you can access that material. And any questions that we didn't get to during the Q&A, please feel free to submit those by email as well. So thanks everyone, have a great rest of your day, and hope that we see you back here at the next Charleston Conference webcast. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.